I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. It's March 18th, 2025. Virginia, Maryland, and DC find themselves in different places with their budget and economic woes. DC Council held a business roundtable where developers sought help to bring building activity back to the city. Montgomery County releases a new budget proposal that includes property tax and fee hikes as counties across Maryland brace for the state to transfer spending responsibility to them. The state Senate is looking at giving counties a choice between rent stabilization and good cause eviction, which would prevent landlords from not renewing leases without reason. In Newmarket, a small town in Frederick County, the city council passes mayoral term limits in an explosive meeting where opponents say the council violated the procedure for charter amendments. And more. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program. If your goal is to make a meaningful impact with a career in local, state, or federal government, discover what this degree can do for you. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by Improbable Comedy and the Sprung Comedy Festival. Check out our 8 different shows, as well as classes in stand-up comedy and storytelling. March 26th through 29th at the Silver Spring Black Box Theater. Tickets and information at improbablecomedy.com.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Washington, D.C. area composer Anna Rubin, who used to teach music at UMBC. She has composed music across several genres, including orchestral, choral, electronica, and stage and video, including this piece, Second Nature, which was commissioned by the Baltimore Dance Project and choreographed by Doug Hamby. You can find her work at annarubinmusic.com. Federal judges seem to have slowed down President Trump and Elon Musk in their quest to fire federal workers en masse. For now, at least. And there seems to be a rift within the administration over who gets to fire employees. But if that impetus picks back up again, Washington, D.C.'s regional economy would still be hurt. Maryland, which is likely to feel the impact most of all, is delayed on its 2026 budget as legislators struggle with the mix of new taxes and spending cuts. DC is still facing $1 billion in reduced budget, but it could avoid cuts if the U.S. House removes provisions in its latest continuing resolution forcing those cuts. Virginia, which passed its 2026 budget a month ago, in February, has the strongest economy in the region and is offering tax cuts, bonuses for state employees, and increased education spending. But if threats to fire federal workers returns, Virginia will not escape the impact. Maryland's hands are more tightly tied as the state faces a $300 million current year deficit and a $3 billion structural deficit. Governor Moore has proposed $2 billion in spending cuts and $1 billion in new taxes, both of which we have covered on the show quite extensively. The House is proposing further a $125 annual fee for electric and hybrid vehicles, which already pay less in gas taxes, the primary source of revenue for the state's transportation fund. There's a proposal to add a 2-cent per ounce tax on sugary drinks, including sodas, and another tax on business services. The governor has already proposed a 75-cent delivery fee. The $2 billion spending cuts target disability services, pushing back the timeline for adding more teachers and other school staff, which is required under the Blueprint law, not contributing to the rainy day fund, and moving teachers' pension costs and property assessment costs to counties. The state also estimates that it gets $23 billion in federal funds annually. The biggest and potentially most destabilizing item is Medicaid reimbursement, which the Trump administration has not yet targeted but may very well do so in the future. The money commitments for the Key Bridge in Baltimore and the FBI building in Greenbelt appear to be on shaky legs. Trump wants state and local leaders to bend to his will. Mayor Bowser in D.C. demonstrated that Trump and the Republican majorities in Congress may be willing to reinstate spending authority to the city in return for her decision to remove the Black Lives Matter mural near the White House. Maryland's suburban counties, Montgomery and Prince George's, face similar constraints as Washington, D.C. Montgomery County has been walking a narrow path between cooperating with federal immigration authorities on deportation and protecting undocumented residents. Last week, we featured the voice of Montgomery County State's Attorney John McCarthy reassuring residents about the limited nature of ICE enforcement in the state. Last Friday, Montgomery County Executive presented his 2026 budget proposal with property tax and fee hikes. Apologies for the low audio, but that's what the county provides.
The Trump budget for our residents is going to result in tax decreases. And if you think about it as a whole, and the governor's budget for many people involves tax decreases, decreases in taxes are being accompanied by shifts in responsibility. The federal government's not going to do what it's going to do. It comes to us. The state is not going to do some of the things it was going to do. That responsibility comes to us. There's no way for us in the face of that to not raise taxes. But collectively, between the state and the federal government, it may not make much of a difference to people what their total tax bill is. And it may mean for us that, our residents aren't spending more money on taxes net than they were spending before. So we're a little, we're trying to take a broader perspective on this. I'm not happy with what the federal government is doing. On the other hand, there is some freedom in getting the ability to raise revenues locally and make decisions where you're not dependent on a federal decision and a federal process or a state decision and a state process. I mean, anybody in the department who's ever tried to go through either the state or federal government to get money can tell you the amount of time and energy that's spent, where if it was our money, we'd be saying this is a priority, this is what we're going to do, and we could act on it. So maybe there's a silver lining in here that if some things shift to us, we're able to more effectively manage things going forward than we are under the current structure. But I do wish the federal money were there. I'm not happy about having to walk away from that. So the other thing I'm going to say about the tax increase is that when you see the numbers, Montgomery County remains the cheapest state in the D.C. region. It's the best way to say it. You come here, you want to live here, you expect, the things that come with the date, you want to be happy. This county will have the lowest tax rate on property of any jurisdiction except D.C. And some of you are going to say, why is D.C. cheaper? D.C. is cheaper because their commercial property tax rate is $1.89 on property over $10 million, $1.77 on property between $5 million and $10 million, and $1.65 on property under $5 million. So they are raising a ton of money from the commercial sector, which allows them to offset more residential taxes. Trust me, if I had their tax program, county residents would be paying 85 cents too.
Taxes and spending take up the political air, but consider a big part of the argument underlying Elrich's budget. On the revenue side, tax collections for 2026 are slated to increase by 10% or more in every major category: property tax, local income tax, property transfer tax, and recordation tax. The primary reason for the increase is a dramatic rise in property valuation in the county since the pandemic. The budget document forecasts that the median home value in the county in 2024 was $615,000, up marginally in 2025 to $630,000, but then forecasted to be up 10% to $700,000 in 2026 and thereafter growing roughly 4 to 5% each year until 2032, when the median home value will reach $880,000. The transmission of property value to tax collection roughly takes 3 years to arrive because of the state's assessment system and is further muted by caps on increases. But there are serious drawbacks of getting this wrong. If the Trump administration returns to mass firings of federal workers, the projected property value increase is unlikely to hold simply because housing demand will moderate and possibly drop. If the forecast is correct, it represents an absolute failure for affordable housing efforts being made in the county and the state. $880,000 median home value means a 33% increase over the next 7 years. Wages are unlikely to rise similarly. Housing affordability will require more rental assistance and government investment. This is a serious bind for any jurisdiction. Faced with a similar dilemma, in D.C., the City Council's Committee on Business and Economic Development, led by Councilmember Kenyon McDuffie, held a roundtable recently, and developers argued that deregulation would bring construction activity back to the city, notwithstanding the federal government's onslaught.
My name is Jair Lynch, and I'm the president and CEO of Jair Lynch Real Estate Partners, a D.C. locally based owned investment and development company. I'm also here as a member of the Developer Roundtable to express support of housing reform, including the Rental Act, and the need to act swiftly in this time of crisis. Since 2018, the Developer Roundtable has been raising concerns about housing market in the district. As our population growth has slowed, the layers and layers of regulation have increasing the cost of production and preservation of housing, especially affordable housing. During COVID, well-intentioned policies like eviction moratoriums and rent forgiveness were put in place to help tenants, but these measures have unintended long-term consequences. Even though 80% of DC's housing stock is considered affordable, subsidized, or rent-controlled, we do not have a clear understanding of how to broaden that marketplace. A coalition of 20 housing providers and nearly 20,000 units have reported nearly $50 million of unpaid rent year after year, a financial burden that makes it impossible to maintain buildings, invest in repairs, and keep units available for those who need them. Right now, newer buildings make up less than 10% of the building stock. The lack of new construction only drives rents up citywide. At the same time, when rent control is meant to help preserve affordability, it isn't actually targeted to those who need it most, since it's not means-tested. Shrinking options for vulnerable and struggling for those at home make it only harder and see displacement happening throughout the region. Less than 200 units were created last year that were not part of some sort of tax abatement, some sort of affordable housing program. Our fundamental market is not working. Just last year, Urban Land Institute's Emerging Trends in Real Estate ranked DC 49th, dropping from top 10.
I am Christine Espenshade, Vice Chairman of Multifamily Capital Markets at Newmark. Newmark is a global real estate investment firm focused on leasing, debt placement, and investment sales of all commercial real estate classes. Investors with the lowest cost of capital, such as institutional investors, pension funds, insurance companies, and REITs, now avoid investing in Washington, D.C. multifamily real estate. The asset class is deemed illiquid or not easy to sell due to TOPA.
TOPA refers to a D.C. law called Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, which gives residents first rights of refusal before an owner can sell a building. This process is believed to be onerous because it holds up sales transactions even when a buyer may be ready.
I have spent significant time analyzing two comparable markets to illustrate my points today. Sales in Washington, D.C. since 2018, 78, 14% of our stock. Sales in Northern Virginia since 2018, 240, 34% of their stock. Since 2018, only 13% of the buyers of multifamily assets in Washington, D.C. were institutional. In Northern Virginia, 37% of buyers were institutional. As a matter of fact, of the 10 sales to institutional investors over the past 6 years in Washington, D.C., only one happened in 2024. It was a 93-unit luxury building in the West End. There have been 78 sales of apartments in D.C. since 2018, totaling $6.1 billion in value. The 240 sales in Virginia totaled $24.2 billion in value, a 75% difference. With DC's transfer tax rate of 2.9%, matching Northern Virginia's sales volume would have generated $523 million more in transfer tax revenue over a 6-year period. Considering modifications to TOPA will increase sales volume and investment in quality housing in Washington.
My name is Richard S. Lake, and I am the managing partner of Roadside Development. Over the last 7 years, the district has experienced a decline in its residential market, further aggravated by the pandemic and various regulations. These include eviction moratoriums, rent increase freezes, and well-documented misuse of ERAP program and TOPA laws.
ERAP stands for Emergency Rental Assistance Programs that were started during the pandemic.
Fortunately, many issues within our system are within our control. The Rental Act is a vital first step in revitalizing this system. I also urge the Council to refrain from imposing additional regulations for a period of time so we can catch our breath.
My name is Akash Thakkar. I appear before you as a lifelong district resident, a champion of the city, and a principal of the firm EYA, a DMV-based residential infill real estate developer. What could we do now? Should we suspend some regulations that in other times might be very helpful? And as you know, many of us lifelong Democrats supportive of many progressive causes, at the same time, if those things are preventing us from building the housing that we need in the city, should there be a suspension? And we've talked about whether it be a suspension of eviction moratoriums, of TOPA, of, dare I say, affordable housing requirements, not forever, but in order to get things moving. Do we look at the PUD process, and should it take 17 years in some cases to get through that? Are there ways to speed that up?
PUD stands for Planning Unit Development and really is a proffer from the developer to planning authorities that exchange density in return for public facilities, going above and beyond what is already required by law.
Davis-Bacon, while it may be noble in its intention, does that stop projects from happening here?
Davis-Bacon is a DC law that stipulates minimum wages, including for skilled labor.
The good news, in my view, is you have these government workers who, sadly, some of them may be losing their jobs, but fundamentally, we've got great human capital in this region. We've got the metro system. We've got great parks, great infrastructure. We need to diversify this economy, and I do think that starts with the deputy mayor and the related entities putting together the best team in the world, and then this council and the mayor putting forth incentives, and the three of those things together, I think we're in a great position to recruit and retain the best and brightest private sector companies in the world. And what does that do? That diversifies our economy, makes us less reliant on the federal government. Couple that with really hitting the cover off the ball with regard to supply, as Jair said. And to get to your point, Councilmember McDuffie, that will make this economy that much more resilient and take us into the future.
In Maryland last year, 2024, Governor Moore pushed through zoning overrides, allowing greater density close to transit stations and for nonprofits wanting to provide affordable housing. This year, the state administration is pushing a new law that would require local governments to expedite permitting for housing projects where there are 1.5 jobs for every available housing unit. At the hearing for the bill, Housing Secretary Jake Day said that the bill was intended to default local government approval for housing projects to yes. The law would allow developers to sue counties for delays in permitting. Naturally, the bill has raised hackles, including from the Maryland Association of Counties, whose members will be losing regulatory power and could be saddled with more housing than the local infrastructure, schools, roads, and sewers can support, or at least they believe that to be true. There are other bills in the state legislature that raise, not lower, regulatory barriers. The Maryland General Assembly is considering a bill on just cause eviction, which is a law that prohibits landlords from switching out tenants at will. The bill passed the House of Delegates and is now in the state Senate, where there is apprehension that a just cause eviction law will erect a new regulatory barrier and undo the deregulation that the state administration and legislators are trying to achieve. And there is now an amendment to that bill in the Senate, which would give counties a choice between just cause eviction and rent stabilization, a choice that is opposed by rent control activists in Montgomery and Prince George's counties. In Newmarket, which sits between the cities of Frederick and Baltimore on Interstate 70 in Maryland, a political fight breaks out into the open at a city council meeting. 3 council members vote to pass a new term limit resolution that will prevent the sitting 6-term mayor Winslow Barhans III from running again. The trouble is that council members may not have followed a Maryland law for charter amendments which requires a period for public comment.
Draft amendments to the town charter resolution 2025-01 qualifications for mayor and 2025-02 qualifications for town council. This is being presented by Councilman Wright.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to be clear, this is not a referendum on anyone currently holding a town position or seeking one. To my knowledge today, these ordinances will not affect anyone in this room, either because we are brand new to this board or to my knowledge and from what I've been told in my face, are not seeking to retain their seat in the upcoming election, which is 2 months away.
This is Christina Trenell. Some of the town council members are asking for term limits with this election for fresh voices. So I'm just curious, those council members that have been sitting for the last few years, are any of them running to bring out those fresh ideas against the mayor?
Christina, I can only speak for me. This is Councilman Chance. I've been endlessly bullied for the last 4 years, and I'm done. I mean, and I think that's part of what Councilman Wright's thing is, that we're not running again because we're tired of being bullied. This is a volunteer position. And I think that the change is a good thing because I don't think there'll be so much bullyism. There's term limits in every office and every government except for these small towns.
I've been here probably the longest of anybody, and the past 4 years have been unlike any I've ever seen. And we've had disagreements in the past, and we've gotten professionally through it. We disagree, but this board and this term has been the most brutal I've ever seen.
Howard Wilson, we're a small town where we all still know each other. I don't know that term limits is the right answer. This guy right here in the picture above the mayor, Frank Smith, was mayor for 25 years. After that, he was on the town council. I had the privilege of being on the town council with him under Frank Shaw, the next mayor, who ran for 25 years.
Should we limit the presidency or should we just pick the best one that's ever done it? So we just FDR 37 terms?
You have the volunteerism now. We're all sitting here, standing here because we're volunteers. I will tell you that the way to increase volunteerism, as Tracy Hackley said, is to change the behavior of what your town residents see. I have not attended every council, but I've listened to quite a few. Some of the behavior that I've seen, and I don't have access to obviously all the behind the scenes stuff, is absolutely shameful. It's embarrassing. And to think that anybody would want to participate while people are storming out of meetings and cursing at staff and behaving like adolescents.
I, in 4 years, have never heard someone curse at staff, first of all. So I'd like you to retract that immediately.
And so it went for the next 2.5 hours. The 5-member town council voted 3-2 in favor of the term limit resolution, but because it was passed without the required public comment period, the current mayor, Winslow Barhans, and his supporters believe that the resolution is not legal. The town's Board of Elections now has to decide on the validity of the change. The town has a part-time attorney, William Wantz, who has advised the town for longer than Barhans has been mayor. Wantz was unreachable before the deadline for this episode, but I have invited him to join if he can in the future. The dispute is time-sensitive. April 7th, 3 weeks from now, is the filing deadline to run for mayor and city council. And if the dispute is not resolved by then, it is likely in the courts. That's all for this episode. be sure to check out our feature interview series that comes out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Washington, D.C. area composer Anna Rubin, who used to teach music at UMBC. The piece from which we have excerpted music for this episode is called Second Nature and was commissioned by the Baltimore Dance Project. You can find her work at annarubinmusic.com. If you want to share your music on this show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.